Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It's been like forever, hasn't it, since we last did this? It seems like so long ago. And I know we've all had a break. I wonder if some of you had a break. I managed to have a lovely holiday, which I'm very grateful for. It was much needed, and just got back on Saturday. So as part of that whole process, I've been a little bit out of the loop because I did totally detach, as I do every year. If I ever get the opportunity to have a holiday, I detach from everything. I leave my phone, I leave my laptop, I just walk away from it all, and it's amazing. Just realised I was looking into the wrong camera for a moment there. I'm out of practice. But I came back on Saturday night. I missed qualifying, which by all accounts was the best bit of the entire Formula One weekend. And then I did get to see the Grand Prix that wasn't a Grand Prix. And I guess that's where we'll start. There's so much to talk about. I've got a bunch of admin to talk about later on. I've also got a competition that I'll be giving away a prize or telling you how you can win a prize later on throughout the show. My brand new show, Wheeler Dealers, went live today on the Discovery channel on Discovery Plus. You can stream it exclusively live. The very first episode, it will go onto the Discovery channel weekly from next week. If anyone wants to talk about that, or if you've seen it, do give me a shout and let me know. But I mean, we've got to talk about Formula One first and foremost, because even though there were very few laps, there seems, as always, to be a lot to talk about as a result of all of the different controversies, decisions and actions that were taken over the course of the weekend. Now, because I've been out the loop a little bit, I need you guys to guide tonight's show. I'll be the conduit through which you can all communicate with each other. I'll chip in and chirp in where I can. I've obviously got opinions from what I've seen and what I know. If you've got questions you want to fire at me, please do send them in. But I will start wherever you guys want to start. First of all, let's just say hello, because thank you very much. Oh, the other thing is, I've just seen someone say, George Alimo says, hello from my dad's basement. You may well have noticed I'm in a different location today. Still in my house, but as many of you know, I've got building work going on. We're about halfway through. It's an absolute chaos disaster zone. But the little room where I normally do my studio work from is kind of gone. So this is the next best thing. There's a number of challenges with that. Next door where the church is, they've just been doing bell ringing practice. I think it's just finished at 9 o'clock, so that might have worked out well. Because we are slightly open to the elements here, I've got moths flying in around the light, so all hell could break loose at any moment, but I'll try not to let it stop us. So, where shall we start? Thank you to you all for joining from wherever you are right across the globe. Okay, points really, says Tom Blackett. Should there have been points for yesterday's race that wasn't a race? Why don't we start there and we'll move it around from there as you wish as we go further down the line. So I'm sure most of you are aware of this. The reason that half points were awarded, or any points at all were awarded yesterday, was because there is a very specific regulation that says if a race lasts for more than 2 laps but less than 75% of the entire race distance, then half points will be awarded. And that essentially is what happened yesterday. Although they weren't racing laps, they were behind the safety car. It qualifies the event, it qualifies as a race, and therefore that regulation kicks in. Now, should there have been points when there was actually no racing happening at all? I'm personally with you. I don't think there should have been. I think somebody should have stepped in and overruled that, which they have the power to do. And it seemed like a common sense decision that could have been taken. It felt like there was nothing to race. There was no racing happening, and so there shouldn't have been any points. We should have just called it a day. Now, we'll get into the whys and hows the event went on, whether it was a chaotic disaster from an organisational perspective, from an FIA perspective, from a circuit perspective, or whether it was just bad luck because the elements were against the event yesterday. We'll get into all of that. But in terms of the points, I'm with those of you who are saying there shouldn't have been any points awarded because we didn't really get a race. And perhaps that leads us on to the idea of, was it even a race? Why on earth did we do just 2 laps or 3 laps or whatever it was behind the safety car and then peel the guys back into the pit lane again and call it? And I'm sure, again, most of you will know this by now, it was simply to trigger or to activate the clauses in everybody's contracts around F1 to say that the event had been staged. If you don't get a race classified on a Sunday, then Formula One haven't delivered on their promise within all of the contracts to deliver a Grand Prix, and that's to the broadcasters, it's to the organisers of the event, the promoters, Of course it's to the fans, but there is no hard and fast contract there. The money all centres around those big deals with broadcasters and race promoters. And if Formula One hadn't just delivered those 2 boring processional laps behind the safety car, they would have lost out on all of that income. Now, perhaps I'd love to know what you think on all of that. Was that the right decision? What can we do about it right now, given that's what we did? And particularly as a lot of people, particularly number one, the fans, as Lewis Hamilton rightly has pointed out, lost out massively. They were the big losers in all of this over the course of yesterday afternoon. So what do you think? What should we have done, and what should we do now? Right, it wasn't a race, absolutely. If it ended under a red flag, rules state they could count back 2 laps, so it's a 1-lap race and no points. They should have moved it the next day like the Americans do. So let's cover that, because I heard Crofty talking about that on the commentary, and bless him, he had a long time to fill. And I have to say, I don't buy that you can stage a Grand Prix at a moment's notice on a Monday. I've been part of these things. I've seen how much goes into them, how many people are needed to stage these events. It's huge. It's enormous. Thousands of people just behind the scenes to put these things on. And, the logistics alone are a nightmare in terms of those people all need a hotel room at a moment's notice. They need to change flights. Many of them are volunteering. The marshals are a perfect example. They've probably got to go to work the next day. How do you overcome that? You can't run a race without marshals. There are all manner of other commitments that people would have had on a Monday that F1 would have had to expect them to drop and change, some of which just might not be possible. So it's a very, very tall order to allow a race to happen the next day with just a few hours notice. So I didn't ever really see that as being an option. Plus, I gather that the rain today in Spa is just as bad, if not worse. So F1 needs to refund fans directly, not the circuit. Spa organisers need to pay for security, catering, traffic contractors who will need paying after this weekend. Okay, so that comes from R. Curtis. Thank you very much. It's a great point. So who's going to compensate fans? Should fans be compensated? First of all, they had a weekend. Many of them had a weekend ticket. They got a weekend's worth of action, even though it may not have been complete. Many of them had just a Sunday ticket. They got very little. They got almost nothing when it came to a Grand Prix. Should they be compensated for that? My feeling, of course, is absolutely, of course they should. And then the question comes, who should pay for it? Now, this is where, when we talk about what do we do now, Formula One triggered those 2 laps to ensure effectively that they get paid. Now, in doing so, the broadcasters have to pay the next instalment of their contract because F1 has fulfilled its obligations. The race promoters have to pay F1 because they've fulfilled their obligations. The fans have all paid the promoters. Now, if the fans get their money back from the people they paid the money to, i.e. the circuit organisers, the promoters, well then it's the promoters that are hugely out of pocket because they still had to pay a massive amount to stage that event. It's not their fault. Should we be saying to the fans, look, it's the way sometimes these things go, and unfortunately you lost out on that one, you might win another one. Seems hugely unfair, but in that scenario, it's the fans that lose out. Now, if you say Formula One should fork out and pay the fans back, of course, in that scenario, it's Formula One that loses out. But look, they're the biggest fish in this little pond. They are the ones that have the opportunity or the capability to absorb a loss like that. So for me, there's 2 options. Formula One either directly pays the fans back, like the comment or the question just said there. Secondly, that payback, that compensation could be split amongst the various parties so that actually everybody just loses out a little and the fans get their money back, being the ones that perhaps shouldn't lose out at all. What do you think? This all smells of a con, says Alex Lamas. I don't think it's a con. I just think it was a very badly dealt with situation. It can be recovered if F1 do the right thing now, but I don't believe for a second that would have ever been their intention until this had been raised very publicly by Lewis Hamilton and other prominent figures in the F1 fraternity. Give them discount for another race, says Peter Darrow. Absolutely, that's another one, but that also relies on those fans being able to afford to get a flight and accommodation or a hotel at another event, many of which they won't be able to do that. So there are ways of compensating fans. It's just who that compensation is going to come from. For me, either should come from F1 directly, given they're the biggest fish, or it gets split amongst a number of the big parties. Let's not forget, the teams will have been paid out as a result of completing those 2 laps yesterday, because they get their prize money, or their appearance money rather, their TV money, based on the number of races that they take part in. They took part in a race yesterday according to their contract, so they're another one that has been paid out. It could be that the teams could contribute something as well. There are a number of parties that didn't lose out a single thing yesterday, and yet the fans are the ones who lost out almost everything. Fans should be compensated by the organisers and FOM. Without the fans, there's no F1. FIA, make it happen. Yes, I mean, that kind of thing is a great scenario. There are a number of those type of scenarios, but ultimately we want the fans, or we think the fans should be compensated for a massive loss. What was the outcome of yesterday's event? Right, it wasn't a race, it was a car parade, in my opinion, says Reza Bashtaya. Absolutely agreed. Move Spa to July like Silverstone. It always rained at Silverstone in June. Yeah. Points, okay, Chris A. Points should have been awarded to the teams only for simply turning up after getting their cars qualified. The drivers didn't race in anger, so they shouldn't get points. So why would they get points for quali? Don't understand that one, Chris, necessarily, because essentially that's exactly what happened. They got half points for their qualifying positions, isn't it? So that's kind of how it worked out in the end. The people complaining are those that watched it on television. Well, I mean, look, it's not quite the same commitment watching it on television. You haven't lost out massively in terms of financially watching it from your TV set, but there's a huge time commitment that was spent by many of us, I'm sure, yesterday afternoon, at a cost to perhaps family who might have suffered without our presence for the entire afternoon. But it's not quite the same thing as the people who were there, is it? I mean, I'm sure people watching it on television will complain, because they always do. They'll always find something. But there we go. Okay. Antonio David says, at Indy 2005, there are at least cars racing. Either just cancel it or postpone it. But 2 parade laps behind the safety car just to make it an official event is a scam. So it's a good point, right? And let's just talk about that for a moment, because at what point would you have cancelled the event, and who would have gained by cancelling the event? So if you say you wait as long as you can to try and get the race happening, and then either because the weather hasn't turned for the better, or you're running out of time, instead of running those 2 laps, they just said, okay, the event's cancelled. So what happens there is F1 don't trigger all the contracts. They don't get paid the same amount by TV companies. So the TV company gets to keep some of their money. The promoters get to keep the money they would have paid to F1. F1 get to keep the money they would have paid to the teams. But the fans still don't really get anything, do they? They have been to an event all weekend. Some of them will have done 2 full days at an event. There's no one still there to pay them back. So it's not really cancelling the event. That isn't really the solution here. I know people are aggrieved that this seems like a money-grabbing way of concluding yesterday's race, but if Formula One do the right thing now, i.e. compensating the people, the fans who were there, well then actually it probably is the right way to have dealt with yesterday's outcome. Because yes, we've triggered those clauses, so everything kind of remains the same. Nobody majorly loses out in that scenario other than the fans, but if we'd cancelled it, you still get the same scenario in that the fans still lose out, and just a few other parties might keep the money rather than it going to F1. So it's all the big fish in that pond are still just moving the money around in a different way. It's still the fans who are the tiny little fish in that pond that lose out in all scenarios. So I'm not sure that cancelling the event, I know that that's what a lot of people I've seen say on Twitter. One thing I would say to Formula One is they tried their hardest, given some very difficult circumstances, to get the event on. And only once they realised it wasn't going to be possible, or highly unlikely it was going to be possible, did they then trigger those 2 laps to activate the clauses. And that, of course, was financially driven. But if they make the right calls with that money now, then all I think can be, forgiven to some extent, in my opinion anyway. Bernie says no refunds. Well, Bernie's long gone, and yeah, I think, well, two things I think. Yeah, I don't think for a second Bernie would have offered any refunds. I'm also not sure that people would have been quite so vocal, and I'm talking about people from within Formula One, would have been quite so vocal about this happening under the Bernie regime. So a sign perhaps of modern day Formula One that people feel a little bit more comfortable in speaking out about issues like this. Okay, just because postponing is hard doesn't mean it's impossible. Since there are standards that has resulted in that, there needs to be plans to postpone a day or two. That's Alpha Maze. If you're talking about postponing for to run the next day, you can't afford to make plans. It would be so cost ineffective to make a backup plan for every Grand Prix just in case of some force majeure incident. As I say, it's a huge undertaking, an enormous undertaking, staging a Grand Prix, and it's very rare that this kind of thing happens. When it does, we have to sort of suck it up, deal with it the best way we can, and go from there. You know, this wasn't dealt with in the perfect way yesterday, but you've got to give credit to a lot of people who tried their hardest to allow this to happen. Ultimately, it was the weather that forced this result or this race not to happen in the end. It wasn't anybody's poor organisation or poor decisions, it was the weather. Now, we could have dealt with some of those differently, and we certainly could be dealing with it differently now, but it's the weather that's to blame rather than any person or group of people. Right, shall we move it on to, because Jack FM says, let's all just breathe a sigh of relief that George Russell was basically confirmed to be moving to Mercedes. So you'll have seen it, I'm sure, but the big rumours, and if you're in the SeedStream app, which I highly recommend you should be, by the way, link in the description. If you're in the SeedStream app and using that, you will have seen all of this news pop up constantly over the weekend, but a number of big rumours around the fact that Valtteri Bottas will be confirmed at Alfa Romeo to replace Kimi Raikkonen, allowing George Russell to take the seat at Williams, at Mercedes. That announcement seems likely or seems planned to be happening around the Monza Grand Prix. Alfa Romeo, Italian team, they want to announce their new star driver in Valtteri Bottas in Monza, and that, so they say, is why everybody's holding off on the decision. Although Toto confirmed a decision's been made about who will partner Lewis Hamilton next year, it seems that may be the reason they're holding out on that. But it's all pointing towards George Russell moving to Mercedes' top team. And if you look at the two qualifying results of Valtteri Bottas and George Russell on Saturday, you might argue that those qualifying performances reflected the news that they might have both been given in the weeks prior to this weekend. So interesting if that's going to happen. Let's see what you guys are saying. Let's move it on from the Spa weekend around the weather and the race and everything else. Let's start talking about some of the driver moves. Potentially Kimi Raikkonen to retire, Valtteri to take his seat at Alfa Romeo, and George Russell to step up, leaving a seat available at Williams. What do you think? Let me see. Michael Chino says, SeedStream app doesn't work in the US. It does, my friend, it does. Drop me a message afterwards and I will help you out on that one. Marc, you're quite tanned. Were you ever at Spa at the weekend? No, I have been on holiday and that's where the tans come from, which is going to cause continuity nightmares when I go back to filming Wheeler Dealers tomorrow, but we'll deal with that then. Makeup. Right, so can't wait for the roles being reversed from 2007 McLaren times at Merc, says Can Cracker. So what do we think about this? Let's just, for this segment, let's speculate that George Russell is going to Mercedes and will partner Lewis Hamilton from next year. How do we think it will go? I don't think anyone's going to question George Russell's talent. I think he's got the speed. We've seen that in that brief moments in Bahrain for Mercedes. We've seen it plenty of times in Williams. He seems like a sort of level-headed character. Is he the kind of character that will rock the boat at Mercedes? And I don't necessarily just mean that through his personality, but is he going to rock the boat in terms of Lewis Hamilton may all of a sudden get a driver that is more than capable of perhaps matching him on occasion and even beating him? And if that happens, How will Lewis react? And this is one of the big talking points around this potential move, because we know what we get with Valtteri and Lewis. We've got clear, almost de facto number 1 and number 2, whereas Valtteri Bottas never really troubles Lewis Hamilton on a major, certainly on a consistent basis. Could George Russell do that? And what will be the effect on the team's dynamic? That's something that I'm sure Mercedes will have thought long and hard about before making this decision, if indeed that's what they've done. But what do you think? How do you think that's going to play out over the course of 2022? New cars, of course, very different driving style going to be required for those. There's every possibility that George could come in and absolutely do a proper job on Lewis Hamilton. Who knows? Pretty sure Lewis doesn't want the competition from George, says Stephen Calvert. I don't know about that. I'm not saying that's the case at all. I think Lewis Hamilton believes in himself 100%, is full of confidence. But what will happen, or what could potentially happen, if he starts getting beaten every now and again, that confidence will go. It's very easy to build confidence over an extended period of time when you're not getting beaten, when there's no major challenge. Certainly from the guy in the other car, of course you're going to be brimming with confidence. What if George comes along and does step it up and does knock Lewis off the perch every now and again? Could that dent Lewis's confidence? 020 Tom 020 says, I would have never taken Russell. He always has bad luck. And that is also very true. Let's hope that changes if he does move to Mercedes. Russell is not going to Mercedes next year, says Sean Kirk. Well, how can you be so sure? All the rumours this weekend from Spa, from all the people I spoke to, and I've seen it now in mainstream media, do seem to be suggesting that is almost a done deal behind the scenes. Alex Wheeler says, George is hungry to prove himself, but also cares about the team overall. Well, now I'm not going to dispute that for a second, but in my experience, first of all, I'll give you two things. I haven't met one Formula One driver and I've worked with a lot, many of them very, very good, many of them multiple world champions. I have never worked with a Formula One driver who actually is a team player. Now, you might think that's a harsh comment, but it's true, and the reason it's true is it's very easy to play the team player game when there's nothing bigger at stake for you personally. So, for example, what I mean by that, if George Russell's at Williams, they have no real opportunities to be challenging for championships at the moment. There's no championship at stake. He doesn't even really have any competition from within his own team. And it's very, very easy in that scenario. And I don't mean to sound cynical about George. This is just generally about Formula One drivers. It's very easy in that scenario, a little bit like it is for Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. Again, no real competition over the last few years, to do and say the right things about your team. When it comes down to it, every single driver on that grid, and I would bet my house on this, what's left of it, doesn't really care about the team one iota. They only care about themselves. Their entire career is built around what they can do for themselves. They have to be selfish. It's part of the job. Now, I'm not being critical of them for this. It's the nature of Formula One. I'm just telling you the way it is as I see it. Every single driver on that grid and every driver that I've seen come before them is only ever out for themselves, despite what you might see or hear them say in front of the cameras. So to come back to that point, I'm not sure that George necessarily will be playing the same team game that we see him, and I love seeing him play it at Williams, if he found himself in a championship contending car with an opportunity to really challenge for the big prize. I think that's when things go out the window. And it also can work, in terms of 2007, as somebody said a moment ago, it's one of the big reasons that 2007 was utterly disastrous for us, because the main guy that was stopping both guys in our team from winning the Holy Grail, the World Championship, is the guy on the other side of our own garage. There is no way you are going to start thinking about the team or thinking about what's best for the team in that scenario. You only can afford to think about yourself, and I'm sure that would happen as George or anyone else starts to move up the grid. Let's see. Luke K says Bottas to Barclays call centre confirmed. Here we go. Right, so much negativity about Hamilton in this chat. Really? Is there? I've missed some of that then. I'm not sure why. I think Lewis, certainly not for me. I'm not saying that Lewis is not a team player any more than any other driver on the grid. I'm just saying that it's very easy for him to do and say the right things when you've got no real threat coming from anywhere really when you're Lewis Hamilton until this season around Max Verstappen. What about Sandy Barnes says, smash that like button because Elvis's mum might be watching. Absolutely, do it. Thanks, Sandy. Lando is my favourite, says Kiwi. What about Lando? I mean, first of all, what a big crash. What a big crash. He was doing so well as well on qualifying. I had to watch it and catch up with it afterwards. As I say, I only got back from holiday on Saturday night. But he was flying, and actually if he hadn't had that incident, there's every chance that he could have been up on the front row with George Russell, or certainly there or thereabouts. And he's a guy who is flying at the moment, full of confidence, obviously full of talent, definitely got his head around that McLaren car, and things are just working out for him. Apart from the crash, that didn't work out well for him, but he is one to watch for the future, absolutely. Right. Who says that Mercedes will have a championship winning car next year? Absolutely nobody. It could go anyway next year, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the great things that we're looking forward to. And I've said many times on this stream or this show, anything could happen next year in terms of this whole new redesign of the cars. But to caveat that, the teams that have the best chance of getting it right are the teams that have the biggest resource right now, the biggest teams, the best people, the best facilities, and that is Mercedes right now. It's Mercedes, it's Ferrari, it's Red Bull. And so if everybody does a very good job in the same way they are now, you'd imagine the pecking order would not change up dramatically, but there's always that opportunity for someone to interpret the rules in a different way and come up with that golden winning ticket. And that could easily happen. So that is what we're all watching out for. Right. Same weather at Zandvoort next week, Mark, is it? So that's Paul Stathers. Is it? I mean, you asking me or are you telling me? Is it the same weather at Zandvoort? I mean, that would be interesting because having been to Zandvoort a few times, and you may have seen my video on the channel when I went there when the Formula One race was announced. It's right on the beach, essentially. It's right next to the sea. It's incredibly windy. And yes, the weather can change as a result of that rapidly. But if it's wet and stormy, the wind coming off the sea, the sand coming off the sand dunes could be a whole new set of challenges for the team. So I haven't seen a weather forecast for next weekend, but either way, I'm really looking forward to that event. It's obviously going to have, a very an atmosphere that is very heavily influenced towards Max. It's going to be a sea of orange. Now, Lewis Hamilton and his fans obviously won't enjoy that to the same extent, but I think as neutral fans, I think it's going to be a spectacle to behold. And I hope everybody's, polite and kind to each other. I hope that we don't get any nastiness from that amount of one driver's fans in one place. But what an epic event it should be. I'm really looking forward to qualifying. It's not a very wide circuit. So overtaking is tricky. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's tricky. But qualifying should be epic. A load of new sections with those banked corners as well. I'm really excited to see what happens there. So good one to watch out for. Can't wait for it. Aston Martin have everything to win a championship, don't you think? Says Karen Sridhar. Aston Martin are building, a pretty epic team, aren't they? They've got, I think, two good drivers at the moment. I think, Seb seems to have found his mojo back. Lance has lost a bit of form recently, but I think we know he can do the job. He's got decent talent. And they are building a decent team around them, and massive new facility coming as well. So they are definitely building for the future. This is not a short-term investment from Lawrence Stroll. They are building something that they think and hope is going to be big. And so absolutely, they are in a good place to start dealing with a new set of regulations, use it as a bit of a reset. And I have high hopes for them in the future. So yeah, absolutely. So someone's saying it's going to be wet on the Sunday evening. Well, that'd be nice for the guys packing up, wouldn't it? Right, where are we? Pretty sure it'll be a bit boring, says Stephen Calvert. Well, do you know what? I'm not sure. I think that the race track doesn't look on paper to lend itself that well to overtaking because it's quite narrow and the sequence of corners it has. But we've said that many times before, and it's actually worked out to be pretty cool. So I'm going to reserve judgment and see what we get, and let's kind of enjoy. If it's a bit Monaco-esque and we have qualifying as the highlight of the weekend, I'm okay with that. I think let's embrace. If it's an epic qualifying, let's embrace it. So let's wait and see what we get. But I think it's got potential to be a pretty spectacular event, not just the race on the Sunday. Right. If it is Hamilton and Russell, and Hamilton retires in 2 years, then who will Mercedes go for? Good point, Frankie Agnostos. So Lewis Hamilton doesn't have a long time left on his career, does he? He has a couple of years on this current contract. Seems like the perfect sort of handing over of the baton if it is George Russell next, where he can learn from Lewis, essentially become the team's number one. But then who becomes the number two? Now, it's maybe a couple of years away, so perhaps too early to tell. But, this could be, can you imagine a Lando Norris, for example, moving to Mercedes? And so many variables at this point, it's just massive speculation. But, I mean, who would you love to see in if it is still a top seat, who would you love to see in that Merc seat alongside, let's say, a George Russell in a couple of years' time when Lewis eventually bows out? Merc will go for Mick, says Can Cracker. Could well do, but he's got a lot of developing to do before he's going anywhere near a top seat, I think. He's done well, but needs to do a lot more, and that will come with time. Lando, says Tom Blackett. Yeah. Nick de Vries, says Damien Reed. Nick de Vries, I think, has huge potential, I've always been a big fan of his work. I think he's a great driver. I think he definitely has potential to do the job in Formula One. Done a very good job in Formula E, of course, coming into it. He's in the Mercedes family, isn't he? So why not? He's still young enough. He's not one of these, 17, 18-year-old kids, but he's still young enough with plenty of time left. So that's not such a bad shout at the moment. Lando, Schumacher, could Vettel be complaining about weather on Saturday? Be political lobbying so they don't have to qualify in the rain because maybe Aston is not that good in the rain? I don't think so. Actually, look, Vettel did a decent job, didn't he, in qualifying in the rain? But I think Vettel is just a massive advocate of safety, and I think that was paramount in his mind. Genuinely, I think that was, you can take that on face value. Alex Albon, says Jack FM, as a potential Mercedes driver. Bottas, says Ryan. Okay. Right, where should we go next? We've done that. I'll tell you where we should go next. And I got this question earlier on. In a minute, I want to talk quickly about wheeler dealers. And I'm sorry, I know this is an F1 show, but I just got to drop it in there quick. I want to talk about the prize that I'm giving away. And I want to talk about some admin around next week. So don't go anywhere, that's all coming. But let's quickly talk about tyres. Now, somebody said to me earlier, what's the point of having wet tyres? There we go. It gives me an opportunity to get the little blue one out, which I haven't had out yet. So what's the point of having the Pirelli blue tyres when the moment that we use them, we can't race the cars? It becomes, there's too much spray, or it's too, the only time we put the full wets on, it's too wet and we can't go racing. So what is the point? Well, they have to have them because there is a crossover point. And obviously it's a traditional thing. F1 cars over recent times have developed in terms of their aerodynamics. They developed a huge amount in terms of how the flow structures are created over a car, how the wake that a car leaves behind them is generated, how much of a wake is created, given they're, first of all, going much faster. The tyres have also developed. So over time, the tyres are now able to disperse even more water than they were in previous years gone by. All of that adds up to creating, first of all, a massive amount of spray, which is what we saw at the weekend, and that leads to terrible visibility. So that's the first thing. And secondly, there is only a certain amount of water on the racetrack that these blue tyres can actually disperse anyway. Once it gets over a certain amount, too much surface water, even the blue full treaded tyres can't get rid of it quickly enough, and the car starts to aquaplane. So but below that level of being too extreme that the cars literally can't drive on it, there's a window where you're almost in intermediates, but perhaps not quite. The idea of using the full wets from a team's point of view, unless you have to, is a disaster, because they rarely last very long, certainly if the circuit's drying. It's always the intermediates that tend to be the faster tyre. And in almost all circumstances where we actually get racing happening, I'm not talking about what happened yesterday, but when we actually get cars racing, it's almost always in that window for intermediates. And so there has to be an option for the full wet tyre, but it's just that the teams will very rarely use it, because that window of opportunity to use it is so small between loss of performance and the circuit being too wet that it gets red flagged anyway. So it has to be an option, but we're never really going to use it that often. But that's why they exist. They have to exist, because otherwise we would limit ourselves to an even smaller window of opportunity for cars to run in any given conditions. If we could only run on intermediates, as soon as it gets reasonably wet, we'd have to stop them. So we have to give them that option, and that's why it happens. F1 rain tyres are as useful as an ice machine in Antarctica. Well, they're actually very good. These full wets particularly disperse a huge amount of water. The tread design is it's no accident. It actually works incredibly well. It's actually more that the car design can't work in those circumstances. They run the front of the car, particularly on the high rate cars, so close to the floor. The cars are running with a lot less downforce when they're in those conditions, because they are not reaching the speeds. And it's not so much that the tyres are rubbish, it's just that Formula 1 cars with their current design don't work very well in those conditions. So call the Inters wet and the wets something else. Well, you can call them whatever you like. That was NJ0. You can call them whatever you like, but they're still going to be the same type of tyre, isn't it? Right, hold on. Make the wet tyres out of sponge to soak up the water. Great idea. Right, we need huge brake lights in the wet. We don't need brake lights, and actually the reason we don't need brake lights is they're pointless on an F1 car. F1 cars are able to follow each other so closely, or they have to be when they're racing, that even with the most enormous brake light, if you hit the brakes, it's quite often too late to react for the guy behind. The rain light is actually incredibly, and this tells you how bad visibility was the other day, they are incredibly bright. I think they've got about 15 or 16 of those very, very intense LEDs. I mean, you can't look at it. It's that bright. It's really bright. And yet, with all of the spray that was there at the weekend, you still couldn't see a car more than about 5-6 meters in front of you. So you'll struggle to find any light that will get through that amount of mist and spray being thrown up by the cars in front. So it is very difficult to overcome that problem with the current car design. But perhaps next year, because it throws up a very different wake, and very deliberately that wake is being thrown up and away from the cars, maybe we'll see some different effects when we're running in heavy rain like that. That's another one that's going to be interesting to see. Wheel covers behind the rear tyres. I mean, that would work in that regard, wouldn't it? But it would be incredibly unaerodynamic. Right, shall we... okay, yes, there's another good one that's come up a lot. The safety car is too slow to get the F1 cars to dry the track. And I think this was something that Ant mentioned yesterday, wasn't it? That perhaps we should think about a safety car that isn't a road car. I mean, those two safety cars that we currently use are incredibly fast road cars. If you saw them on a road, you'd be amazed how quick they are. It's just compared to an F1 car. So the only thing that's really going to compare with an F1 car is either an F1 car or another very, very high performance race car. But don't forget, the safety car has to also contain quite a lot of equipment, safety equipment, some medical equipment, 2 people, a huge amount of communications equipment. And that's one of the main reasons that it's not just a little single-seater racing car. But if we want to think about speeding the cars up behind safety, under safety car periods, you know, we could easily do that. We could also do it virtually. We do the virtual safety car where we want to slow them down. We could do a virtual safety car at greater speeds. That's also very possible. So there are a number of ways to get around that and increase the speeds if we wanted to, and maybe that's something that might come off the back of all this. Yeah, Bernd Mailander was giving it everything, says Roy Ferntorp. Yeah, he absolutely was. He was on the limit of that car. Did you see the W Series crash? I did. Huge. Very glad to see that everyone walked away from that. GT3 car would be good for a safety car. Yeah, I mean, it would, although that's not a million miles off, you know, what I'm talking about. A very fast racing car, sports car, GT3 car could work. A GR Yaris. Okay, right, let's get on to, how long have we got left? 20 minutes. Okay, what should we talk about? Let's get on to the competition. Let's do the competition because it's been very kindly given to me by the F1 Fragrances lot, a bag of goodies here. Now, I know that you've seen me talk about some of this stuff before, and I'm not just saying this because they've given me a bag of goodies to give away to you guys, but the stuff is really lovely. The smells of the various aftershaves and fragrances that they have come up with, the F1 Fragrances team, are actually really very good. It's not just some gimmick. This is not just a bit of merch. This is an incredibly high-end perfumer who has put it together, that do a lot of the stuff for the very high-end designer brands. And they have spent a lot of time and energy and money, I believe, in putting this package together. They've sent me one to give away to you guys. And inside here, and this is worth a considerable amount of money, there are samples of a number of the small samples of a number of the fragrances. And these are all great. And I use, which one's this? No, that's called Turn 1. That one is called Overtake 320. I've got a personal favourite down here. Oh yeah, there we go. That one is called Neon White. I've got this one here, which is Carbon Rain. That's my favourite. Carbon Rain, just a personal favourite. I've tried them all, and now I'm using this one almost every day. It really is very good. So you've got a number of those in a little presentation box. That's five of the little ones. And then on top of that, we've got a big one. Oh, and look at that. It's my favourite one as well. Carbon Rain. Now all of this package you can't buy is the first thing, because this is a press pack that is not available for sale in the shops. And it's also worth a huge amount if you could buy it, because this stuff is not cheap. But if you would like it, the whole point that I was getting to here, if you would like it, it's yours if you follow these very, very simple instructions. And the instructions are simply this, and I'm doing this one on Instagram because that's what they've asked me to do, because they're trying to promote a new Instagram account, which is Race Fragrance Collections. So at Race Fragrance Collections on Instagram. And I apologise if you're not on Instagram. If you really want it, set yourself up an Instagram account and follow these guys. So the competition is this. You need to be following at Race Fragrance Collections, and they will check this later on in the week. I'll be announcing winners next week after the Dutch Grand Prix. So you need to go to Instagram, follow Race Fragrance Collections, and then you need to post on Instagram a post of whatever you like, but you need to tag me and them and one other person in that post. You can make it F1 related, talk about Formula One, talk about the competition, tell people about what we're doing, say something nice about my channel, say something nice about the fragrances if you've experienced them already. Whatever you want to do, something F1 related, but tag at Race Fragrance Collections, tag me in it, that's F1 Elvis, and tag one other person. It could be a friend or a family member. Tell them about what we're doing. And as long as you're following at Race Fragrance Collections, they will go through all of those people at some point over the course of the next week after the Dutch Grand Prix, and you could win that lovely goodie bag full of lovely stuff. It's worth it, believe me. It's lovely stuff. It really is nice, and it could be yours. So go ahead and do that. And again, I apologise if you're not on Instagram, but that is what this week's competition is happening on. Right, so now we've done that, and I'll remind you again at the end about that one, but please go ahead and do that and tell your friends. Now, a little bit of admin is that we normally do this show, as we are tonight, at 9 p.m. on a Monday. Now, my new show, Wheeler Dealers, the brand new series, guess what time that's on? That is coming to Discovery Channel at 9 p.m. on a Monday, starting next week. And so we need to move, because I can't ask you all to come and turn up and take part in this when I'm also asking people to go and watch the show that we've spent the best part of 8 months making at the same time on another channel. So we're going to move it, and I'd love you to tell me, because I don't know, you're all over the world. I'm never going to be able to keep everybody happy with this, but for me, I could easily move this show 1 hour earlier or 1 hour later. I could do this at 10 p.m. till 11 p.m. in the UK. You can work out what that is in your time, or potentially I could do it 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the UK on a Monday. So same day, just an hour earlier or later. At some point over the next week, just drop me a message either here or on any of my socials. Just DM me. Tell me what you prefer. And if I get an overwhelming feeling that one of those would be better for people, we'll go with that. That's that one. And whilst we're on the subject of Wheeler Dealers, I would love it if you'd watch it. We have spent a long time making it. We're still going, and actually we're rolling immediately into another series of Wheeler Dealers Dream Car, which is the spin-off series. But the main Wheeler Dealers show, which I'm new to, I'm incredibly proud of what we've managed to achieve. It's something completely different for me. My whole career has been centred around F1 and racing cars in general. But of course, beyond or beneath all of that was just a love of cars. And so having spent the last 6 months essentially getting back to my roots, getting my hands dirty, getting stuck into some proper good old engineering on some amazing cars, I'd love to know what you guys think of it. We've had a huge amount of fun making it. I've watched a number of the old shows, or the shows that have gone before, and I'm really proud of what we've done. I think we've continued in the same vein, but also put our own twist on it. We've tweaked a few things. I think we've got a slightly different feeling to it. It feels nice. Mike Brewer and I get on really, really well. I think it's working really well. But of course, what we think and what we say matters not nearly as much as what you guys think or the people that watch it. So I'd love to know your feedback on that if and when you get around to watching it. You can stream it now actually on the Discovery Plus channel, or you can wait and it'll be on the Discovery channel itself from next Monday at 9 p.m. That's that. Right, so we've got 10 minutes left. I think that's all my admin. Yeah, that's all my admin. So let's get back. Yeah, do a YouTube poll, says McLaren F1 Face. I might do that. I'll pop a YouTube poll on the community tab to find out when you want to do the show, whether you want to do an hour earlier or an hour later. So look out for that. I'll pop that up later on. Right, where should we go next? We've got 10 minutes. Which other subject? Should we talk about... what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? Alpha May says, how are the dogs? Dogs are great, thanks very much. God, I missed them when I was away for a week on holiday. Missed them like crazy. They were staying with a friend, and you can imagine the response or the welcome that we got when we got home. That was amazing. So when is the show on in Canada? I don't know the answer to when Wheeler Dealers comes to other countries around the world. It will do, and it's coming to all of you, I have no doubt, as it always does. But it starts here in the UK, it gets its first rollout here, and then it will gradually make its way around the world. So it goes out in something like 120 different countries. So you'll all get it at some point. Can we talk F1 schedule, says Harrison Alga. Okay, what do you want to talk about with the F1 schedule? Come back to me on that. Okay, let's get it back to... I'm sorry to hijack it with Wheeler Dealers stuff. I didn't mean to do that. Well, I did mean to do that. But let's finish it off on F1. Right, talk about the next race. Okay, let's talk about the next race. The Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix. We touched on it earlier. I think the track is going to be spectacular. The setting is spectacular. the atmosphere is going to be spectacular. Whichever way you look at it, it's going to be spectacular. Whether it suits you as a Lewis Hamilton fan or not, is one thing. But as an event, I think it's going to be epic. They've waited 2 years now to make sure they could stage this event with fans in place, and finally they've been able to do it. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. I can't wait to see cars on track for the first time. I can't wait to see how the tyres work around this newly surfaced track with a couple of banked corners that will have an impact on how you set the car up. Do you set the car up for those corners? I mean, one of them, particularly the last corner coming onto the start-finish straight, is quite heavily banked. And given that corner then leads onto the start-finish straight, you could be tempted to put a huge or a reasonable amount of emphasis from your setup on getting that slingshot out of that banked corner and onto that straight. It's not an incredibly long straight, but it's the longest straight on the circuit. And so the setup balance is going to be a real challenge. And that over the course of, obviously they're working on it in virtual world for some time now, but on Friday will be the very first time we get to see exactly how a real car works on that track. And I think that's going to be really interesting. A proper challenge for the drivers to learn the track, but also for the engineers to figure out the best compromises on car setup. Alonso helmet cam, says James Wells. Loved it. What did you think? Yeah, loved it. I think it's we've seen it in other categories. We've seen it in IndyCar. We've seen it in other categories. Formula E have used it for some time. I think it's a brilliant addition. Just to throw to every now and again. You don't want to see, be on it for too long, but for me, why not? If we've proved the technology works, if we've clearly proved it's safe because a driver's been running it in an F1 event, well then let's start rolling it out. It's one of those things that it exists and F1 are actually a little bit behind the times in using. So I don't know, what did you think? I thought it was a great little insight, a little bit more of an insight into a driver's eye view. Thanks for the pleasant comment on my haircut. Very Nico Hulkenberg. I mean, I'll take that as a compliment. Thanks. Why don't we have more helmet cams? Simply because they are still trying to roll it out, prove the technology. And it's not just about proving that we can fit a camera in a crash helmet, because we know we can. It's about making sure we can get a stable link from that camera out of the helmet, connected into the car and beamed back to the pit wall. There are a limited number of cameras that you can have in real time from any car at any given time, which is why sometimes, when the FIA are looking into an incident, or the stewards are looking into an incident that's happened in a race, quite often they don't have access to every single camera angle, not every onboard camera from every car until after the race, so they can actually plug in and download the footage. That's because they have a sort of limited amount of bandwidth to be able to transmit live the amount of data that comes from one camera. So you couldn't activate all the positions on each of the cars at all times. And this is now another one that they're chucking into the mix. There's obviously the safety element in terms of what happens when it's inside a crash helmet. There's fine-tuning the view, the perspective you get, the angles, the position of it. And it's then convincing the drivers and the helmet manufacturers and the teams and everyone else that they're willing to operate with this on a more permanent basis. I suspect what happens is Fernando volunteered to give it a go, but because it's not in the regulations right now, to roll it out immediately would need the full agreement of everybody. And of course, not everyone's going to be willing to do that straight off the bat without having tried it. So that's what this slow rollout is all about. How do I earn more money to pay for channels? Sean Kirk, there are a number of ways you could earn more money, but I will leave that to you to figure out. Right, Russell's podium was fantastic. How will it transform Williams? Sandy Barnes. Good one. Do you know what? This was a really positive weekend for Williams. Not just because of the podium, because the podium's great in terms of it does give them points. And those points are incredibly valuable to Williams because that does translate into significant prize money. It may have only been half points, but that's still a significant number of points for a team like them. Obviously, there's some slight hollow edge to the fact that they took a second place, because if the race had happened, who knows whether they'd have been able to hang on to that position or not. But the bigger impact for Williams is that, they got that car in fair and square circumstances to second on the grid, albeit in mixed conditions, but they and their driver did an incredible job. And on top of that, Latifi also managed to drag his car into the top 10 on Saturday too. So this was a really positive weekend for the Williams team. And look, it will have that effect on everybody throughout that team, for the garage and the factory. The effect that it has, a great result has on anybody in a team, is enormous, particularly for a team that doesn't get very many of those good results. It can have a massive impact in just raising morale, raising confidence. There's a smile around the factory. You get better work when people are happy. You get better performances out of people when they're in a good state of mind. And so all of that will filter through. Might only be by small amounts, but look, Formula One is all about marginal gains, and that kind of marginal gain for Williams could actually be really quite significant when you roll it out across a team of hundreds of people. It was a brilliant, brilliant weekend to see for them. They needed it. Jos Capito is the right man to lead Williams. I fully agree with you on that. I think he's a great man, a great leader. Spent a very short amount of time at McLaren, of course, and it's a shame he didn't stay, to be fair. But I think he's a great man to be involved in Formula One. Under the radar to some extent at the moment because it's Williams. But I think if Williams can gradually build, and like we said before, next year's a huge opportunity, I think he is a really, really strong contender for one of the big leaders of this sport. So I'm pleased that he's there. I think it's great for Williams, and it's great for F1 to have him involved. Right, let's finish on this one. Will you make another podcast series at some point? And I want to address this because I feel terrible. I did promise a second series of the podcast. I really enjoyed making the first series, and I've had some amazing feedback from lots of you still listening to it. It's called Pit Lane Life Lessons, if you haven't already checked it out. And I am doing a second series. It's just that I've had no time. My life has been a roller coaster doing Wheeler Dealers over the last 8 months. And it's going to continue to be, because we're filming Wheeler Dealers and Wheeler Dealers Dream Car right through until May of next year. Having said that, I'm trying to find a way to make it happen. I've recorded 2 or 3 with various other people. I might intersperse those with another set of ones that I do myself, because they're a bit easier logistically to coordinate. So either way, you will get a second series of Pit Lane Life Lessons. Apologies for the delay. It will be coming. It just might be a tiny bit more delayed, but I'll do my best. Right, it is basically 9 o'clock. I want to thank you all for joining. I apologise for the weeks of absence. I did sort of go AWOL slightly for a few weeks with this, but I really appreciate you all coming back. I'd love it if you could tell your friends that we'll be back next week. I will put a poll on the community tab to figure out which time we should do it next week. Don't forget to jump onto Instagram, follow at Race Fragrance Collections, and then drop a post onto Instagram of anything Formula One related, tagging in at Race Fragrance Collections, tagging in me, and tagging in one other person. And I will put all of those instructions very clearly in the description of this video. Good luck. You could win that big bonus bumper bag of F1 fragrances where you can all smell lovely in the future. And in the meantime, when you're waiting for next weekend's Grand Prix, jump onto the Discovery Channel or Discovery Plus and get yourself onto the new Wheeler Dealers series. I'd really appreciate it, and let me know what you think. Have a wonderful week, guys. I really, really hope you have a good one, and I will catch you all very, very soon. Ta-da!